Hello! In this lecture, we'll cover the history and ecological relevance of occupancy estimation and modeling. Modern occupancy estimation was developed in the early 2000s by Daryl McKenzie from Proteus Consulting in New Zealand, and Jim Nichols, recently retired from the USGS Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. Around the same time, occupancy estimation was developed independently by another Northern and Southern Hemisphere collaboration of Drew Tyre, now at the University of Nebraska, and Hugh Pussingham, currently with the Nature Conservancy in Australia. I'll begin by comparing three levels of inference for population and landscape ecology. At the population level, we are most often interested in the state variable for abundance. At the landscape level, the proportion of sites occupied is a useful state variable for extent of occurrence. Population dynamics are defined by vital rates such as survival, reproduction, and movement. At the landscape level, occupancy dynamics are governed by vital rates for local extinction and colonization. The sampling unit for the population is the individual, and the sampling unit for the landscape level is the patch or site as defined by the question. The problem inherent to occupancy data involves using detection and non-detection data to infer presence-absence of a species. The presence of the species is usually not a problem, except in the case of misidentification, but non-detection corresponds to apparent absence because the species may have been present but not detected. The main problem is assuming non-detection of the species equals true absence. Issues with incomplete detection include assuming detection is perfect, detection is equal for different species, and detection is constant across space and time. Recently, there has been an uptick in the use of presence-only data for species distribution modeling. However, it is difficult, if not impossible, to make reliable inferences about distribution or habitat relationships without knowledge of the sampling design. Methods that generate pseudo-absences tend to rely on strong assumptions. Have a look at Lozier and others' 2009 for a lighthearted example of how presence-only data can lead us down the path of mythology. Ecology has been thought of as the study of the distribution and abundance of organisms. I recommend Andawortha and Birch for a historical perspective. Occupancy estimation is an approach to quantify the geographic range of species. This has been called the primary distributional component of ecology and the basic unit of biogeography. Shifting ranges in response to climate change is a current research theme, and paleobiology with incomplete fossil records holds great potential for occupancy estimation. Occupancy modeling is a useful framework for habitat relationships and resource selection. Detection probabilities are important, especially when related to habitat covariates and resource units. In this graph, site occupancy is on the y-axis and the habitat covariate is on the x-axis. The bold line is the true habitat relationship. Here is the relationship when detection is less than 1 and constant. We see more bias when detection is less than 1 and is positively correlated, and negatively correlated with the habitat covariate. Occupancy data are necessary for parameterizing metapopulation models. Usually, incidence functions are used to estimate patch extinction and colonization rates. Metapopulation models assume a stationary Markov process and relationships between local extinction and patch size, and colonization and patch isolation. Interestingly, it has been shown that occupancy dynamics and metapopulation viability are biased when detection probabilities are less than 1. Occupancy estimation plays an important role in large-scale monitoring. Abundance estimation can be too expensive for geographically extensive monitoring. Occupancy estimation is usually less expensive and well suited for these large-scale surveys. And for some territorial species, if the sampling unit is approximately the size of the territory, then occupancy is approximately equal to abundance. However, this is rarely possible in practice. Example monitoring programs include amphibian monitoring, breeding bird surveys, carnivores, insects, and endangered species. Occupancy data are useful for epidemiology or invasive species, where replicates within an area are checked for disease or invasive species. Pay careful attention to the assumptions for this kind of work. If the detection of the disease or pathogen is imperfect within an individual, then treat individuals as patches and estimate disease prevalence with replicate tests for individuals. Occupancy data are central to understanding species interactions in community ecology. Historically, a posteriori assembly rules have been used to explain observed patterns. No models are often used to investigate observed species distribution matrices generated by different underlying processes. However, there are two big problems with the historical approaches. There is difficulty separating ecological process from pattern, and the approaches do not account for incomplete detection. Finally, occupancy models are useful for making management and conservation decisions. First, consider the objectives for what you want to achieve. Next, determine what management alternatives can be used to address the objectives. Now you need a model of species responses to the management actions, and this is where occupancy modeling comes in. Calculate measures of model credibility, and last but not least, integrate the management system with the monitoring program to estimate the system state and other relevant variables. Occupancy modeling can be used to determine thresholds for conservation and management decisions. Consider a rare frog that breeds in wetlands that are used to irrigate farmland. How do we manage water use and persistence for the frog population? Going through the process in the previous slide, we can develop a decision matrix that shows the amount of water used for irrigation depends on both frog occupancy and water level.